Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be with you as we recognize the accomplishments of the class of 2018 and we witness the commissioning of our newest Army leaders. Congressman Womack, thank you for your leadership here at the Academy, but more importantly, thanks for all you do for our men and women in uniform. Secretary Esper, General Milley, thank you both for your leadership, and I know the soldiers in the crowd would agree with me that the Army of the United States could not be in better hands. General Caslin, thanks for the introduction, but more importantly, Soup, thanks for your leadership at West Point for the last 5 years and throughout your distinguished career. As you prepare to retire, know that you've left behind an extraordinary legacy, the most important legacy a leader can leave behind, and that's a legion of men and women that are proud to call themselves Caslin trained. And Mrs. Caslin, Shelley, I know you're out there somewhere. I also want to thank you for what you've done for the countless cadets, their families, and our Army families through over 4 decades of service. And cadets, the Soup asked you a minute ago to recognize your parents. I'm going to ask you to please stand up and recognize your superintendent. He would not want me to do that, but I got to tell you, after 43 years of active duty and all he has done to help shape and mold you for the future, I'd ask you to join me in recognizing the impact he's had on you. And most importantly, to the class of 2018, congratulations. I know today caps what's been a busy week of events to recognize your accomplishments, and I'm sure you're feeling pretty good at this point, and you should. 4 years ago, you accepted the challenge to join the Long Gray Line. You could have chosen an easier path, but you didn't. As General Caslin said, you faced that cadet in the red sash on our day, and according to legend, there were torrential rains on that day. You survived Beast Barracks, Plebe Boxing, Camp Buckner, and you were scrambled not once, but twice. And I understand that you were actually the last class to be scrambled. It wasn't easy. In fact, I was told by the president of your class it was so tough you posted the lowest plebe grades of any class in recent history. And your class president told me that with some source of pride. But look at you now. Whether you're the honor grad or the GOAT, you made it. And among you are scholarship recipients, world-class athletes, inventors, and published authors. And as General Caslin said, we can't forget it was while you were here that the tide was finally turned in the Army-Navy game. You know, I thought that you would probably get excited about that, but I want to tell you, I've been the chairman now for 3 Army-Navy games. I'm 2 for 3, and Army has actually scored more points when I have sat on the Army side than I was sat on the Navy side. So the coaches, the 12th man, and the team may get some credit, but I'm taking a little bit of credit myself for what happened those 2 years. On a more serious note, I want to personally thank you for answering the call to serve during a very challenging time. You chose to join an Army at war. And to that point, today there's more than 178,000 soldiers actively supporting missions around the world. Many are in harm's way, and they're joined by thousands more sailors, airmen, and Marines. And as we celebrate today, I'd ask you to keep them and their families in your thoughts and prayers. This is also Memorial Day weekend. And I'd ask you to be particularly mindful of those that have made the ultimate sacrifice in our Gold Star families. Well, those of you graduating today should be proud of what you've accomplished. I know that you recognize you didn't get here by yourself. And appropriately enough, the superintendent recognized the families as we began the program. And I would tell you, those of us sitting on the dais have the best seats in the house because we have the chance to look out at the faces of the parents, the grandparents, the siblings, and the friends, and the faces are beaming with pride. And they should be. They played an important part in you sitting here today. But I'd also ask you to recognize the faculty and staff here at the Academy. You couldn't have the premier leadership experience in the world were it not for their efforts. And perhaps more importantly, they have, over the last 4 years, shown you what right looks like. and they have every reason to be proud of you today. And I'd ask you to please recognize the contribution that the faculty and staff at the premier leadership institution in the world has had on you. Class of 2018, you may find it hard to imagine, but I've been in your shoes. And although it's been 41 years ago this week, I can clearly recall my own graduation and commissioning and how anxious I was to get on with the next phase of my life. I wasn't particularly interested in what the graduation speaker had to say, and I'm going to make a bold assumption. I'm going to assume that many of you share the same sentiment that I had on my graduation day about the graduation speaker. So with that in mind, I'm not going to go on long, but as you prepare for the challenges of Army leadership in the next chapter of your lives, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts. First point I'd make is that the profession of arms is dynamic. And to be successful, you have to anticipate and embrace the constant changes in the character of war. Here at West Point, you've studied military history, and you recall the price paid in the 20th century by armies that were slow to adapt. 100 years ago, leaders on both sides of World War I were slow to grasp the significance of emerging technologies in the changing character of war. The price for that delay was high. 10 million in uniform were killed, a figure that's unfathomable today. To some extent, you can say the same thing about the eve of World War II. For example, while the Blitzkrieg reflected the Germans' appreciation for the potential of armor supported by close air, major Western armies continue to view the tank as merely an infantry support weapon. And frankly, if we look back at change over the past century, most of the changes occurred after significant failure. But there were notable exceptions. In the years before Vietnam, a small number of Army leaders considered how the helicopter might be employed to enhance mobility on the battlefield. Among them were men like Jim Gavin from the West Point class of 29, Hamilton Howes from the class of 30, and Hal Moore from the class of 45. Their ideas rapidly evolved from articles and briefings to the 1965 combat deployment of the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. These soldiers drove innovation that combined emerging technology with operational concepts. They fundamentally changed Army maneuver, and their ideas remain relevant today. The moral of the story is that there's no substitute for taking a clear-eyed look at the threats we'll face and asking how our force will adapt to meet those threats. There's no substitute for leaders like Jim Gavin that recognize the power of new ideas, new technologies, and new concepts. And more importantly, there's no substitute for leaders like Hal Moore with a bias for action and a drive to effect change. And for the class of 2018, I believe the need to aggressively lead change is going to be particularly important to you. I say that because everyone here in the dais knows that the pace of change and the speed of war has greatly accelerated. And in many ways, the environment that you're going to lead in is very different than the one that confronted lieutenants in 1918, in 1968, or frankly, even in 2008. So regardless of where you find yourself serving in our Army, challenge yourself to be the kind of leader that continues to think about, to write about, and to lead change. Bring your intellectual curiosity and the openness to new ideas that you established here at West Point. Bring that with you forward in your days as an Army leader. Be inspired by those soldiers who pioneered air assault and the many others who have enabled the Army to adapt and win throughout our nation's history. Class of 2018, earlier I mentioned how clearly I remember my graduation day and how disinterested I was in the speaker. But there's something else that I remember very clearly about the day that I was commissioned. Like you, I had studied military history, and I remember finding it difficult to identify with the exploits and the courage of those who went before me. I remember wondering how I would meet the expectations of my future platoon. How would I respond if I was called to lead them in harm's way? Or how would I deal with those tough leadership issues that we know we will all experience? I wondered if I'd remember anything that I had learned in school. And you may be sitting here having similar thoughts. You may wonder how you'll measure up to your predecessors, the Pattons, the Eisenhowers, or the Bradleys. Closer to home, you may wonder how you'll measure up to some of the leaders who have influenced you here at West Point. Leaders like Major Nick Esslinger, now teaching in behavioral sciences and leadership. As a platoon leader in Iraq, he courageously risked his life to protect his fellow soldiers. Or Major Jill Rayon from the physics department. Jill had the presence of mind and the courage to pull two fellow pilots from a burning helicopter before their rockets cooked off. Or Major Jake Maraldi from the Department of Military Instruction. Jake demonstrated exceptional competence and leadership while leading a quick reaction force during some of the toughest fighting in Afghanistan. You may also wonder if you'll meet the challenge of leading in a period of great change and have the leadership and the drive of Hal Moore. Or you may wonder the most important question: will you meet the expectation of your soldiers? But I've got to tell you, just like General Kasdan mentioned a minute ago, when I look out at you, I don't have those concerns. Don't get me wrong, I'm not understating for a minute the impact that your predecessors have had or their accomplishments. What they did was remarkable. In the end, they took ordinary groups of young men and women and inspired them to do extraordinary things at places like Normandy, Yardrang, and Nuristan. And that's certainly a big deal. But if you look at how these leaders succeeded, I think you'll recognize the method. And you remember that the fundamentals of leadership are the most important aspect of our profession. And they're a part of our profession that hasn't changed since President Jefferson founded this institution in 1802. It's true that your predecessors like Lieutenant Esslinger, Lieutenant Rayon, and Lieutenant Maraldi attacked their profession with energy and enthusiasm. It's true that they were smart, they were tough, and they were competent. And it's true that many of them demonstrated great courage when called to lead in harm's way. But it's also true that the primary reason your predecessors were successful is that they recognized that after West Point, it was no longer about their individual capabilities. They knew it was about their team. They knew it was about instilling an esprit in their units and a will to fight in their individual soldiers. They knew it was about establishing a bond of trust between the leaders and the led. In the end, they knew that character, competence, courage, and commitment, that's all part of the sticker price of being an Army leader. After West Point, you get no more credit for that. It's a given. As a lieutenant, you won't be wearing the star or the wreath on your uniform, nor will you be displaying your athletic trophies. When you check into your units, your soldiers will simply want to know that you lead from the front and you put their interests ahead of your own. To paraphrase one of your more quotable predecessors, General George Patton, wars may be fought with weapons, but they're won by men and women. It's the spirit of the soldiers who follow and the officers who lead that gain victory. Class of 2018, what I'm really reminding you of this morning is something very similar to what the superintendent said a minute ago. If you take care of your soldiers, they'll take care of you. If you lead, they'll follow. And together, you'll take the hill. Thank you in advance for taking care of the young men and women who will proudly follow your lead. Thanks for carrying on the traditions of the long gray line. God bless you, Semper Fidelis, and Army Strong.